And so I'm going to be introducing our next speaker, and it is Patrice Jones. She is the founder of Vine Sanctuary, an LGBTQ-led refuge for farmed animals that works within an ecofeminist understanding of intersectionality, as well as the author of The Oxen at the Intersection, A Collision. A former tenant organizer and anti-racist educator who has taught college and university courses on the praxis of social change, Patrice writes and lectures frequently on the subjects of activist strategy and intersectionality, encouraging everyone to think more ecologically. Please help me welcome Patrice Jones.
Is my mic working? Yay! Hi. I'm having a sudden burst of shyness, so please bear with me. So I am from Vine. Oh, and she already said that, which is perfect because I always forget to say it. That's why I had it here first. Please do check us out online. We're in Springfield, Vermont. More than 500 non-human animals live at the sanctuary, ranging from tiny little birds to 3,000-pound cows and everybody in between. That's us there. Here we are in Berkeley. And you're here at the Conscious Eating Conference, busily digesting the lunch that you just ate. And I'm here hoping that the process of digestion won't make you too sleepy. Because the thing is that everything in your life led to this moment, led you to be here now with me, digesting your cornbread, fixing to hear, what did I say I was going to talk about? Who has their program? Fixing to listen to me talk about mad cows and queer ducks and unconventional sheep and what all of them have taught me about intersectionality. And the things that led you to be here, I'm not kidding when I say this is always true, right? Every moment in your life adds up to where you are right now, yes? Right, and so some complex conjunction of choice and circumstance eventually led you right here, right now. Yes? Yes. And you did make choices. You made choices all along, right? But at every stage, those choices were both opened up and delimited by your circumstances, by the material, physical circumstances in which you found yourself, by social circumstances, yes? Like we have here today Seba Johnson, pioneering Olympian, vegan since birth. Those of us who've ever heard her speak know that she was, at the age of 14, the youngest Olympic skier and the first black female skier to ski in the Olympics. And it all started when she was 5 years old and she saw some skiers and she said to her mom, that's what I want to do. Right, and so of course she worked really hard to get to the Olympics, yes? But would that have ever happened if she didn't happen to see some skiers? Right? Or hadn't, even if she did, would she have even thought to know what a skier is? And maybe even if she did, if she didn't have access to snow, could she have become one? Right, so I mean that might seem a minor or an obvious example, but this is what I'm talking about here. And the circumstances that delimit your choices, of course, are also social. choices, and by the circumstances, and by that I mean like our economic system and our legal system, and also the intersecting web of social injustices that we often talk about when we talk about what's called intersectionality, which I will talk about a little bit later. And so all of that factored into the various choices that you made along your way to end up sitting in a red chair, digesting lunch, listening to me, and wondering where I might be going. But one thing I'm almost entirely sure about is that of all the things that might have led you to be here today, in part you are here today because you want something. Because you want something. And if unless you're very, very different from most other people, at least part of what you want that probably factors into what you want that led you to be here today is better relationships. You might be here because you want better relationships with non-human animals. You might be here because you want better relationships with what gets called the natural world, as though it was something outside of us. You might just want to get with the cute vegan you came to this event with. Or maybe just a better friendship with your vegan friend who dragged you here today, right? So that's you. That's you. Desire drove you here today as part of your ongoing life process of making choices within circumstances. And that's true for me too, of course. And if I go back a little further, I could take you to the set of choices that led Miriam Jones, one of the co-founders of Vine Sanctuary along with me and I, to poultry country in the year 2000, because it was desire that led us there, this sort of vague wish to be back to the land and not understanding that we were actually moving into, I am going to say factory farmland because that's where it is. I'm not going to talk to you. What do I need to tell you about that? I just need to tell you about that two social justice activists accidentally found themselves in poultry country and found a chicken by the side of the road and decided to bring that chicken home because the local animal shelter, when they called and said, "We found a chicken by the side of the road, what should we do?" laughed and said, "Have a good dinner." And because we thought that, we knew about United Poultry Concerns, but we thought that they were a lot further away from us than they were. Now, I'm not going to tell you too much about that chicken because I know that Karen's fixing to talk about chickens a lot. And so I'm going to talk about some of our other non-human friends, but I do need to tell you just a little bit about the chicken called Victor, because he is the other co-founder of Vine Sanctuary, and he was a rooster who we didn't realize was a rooster when we first rescued him. He became part of our household for a few months before he started crowing, and even then we didn't know what was happening. So we thought he was choking, I don't know. So there's no time for these stories. The point is that we discovered that this bird to whom we had become bonded, I discovered that this bird to whom I had become bonded was a rooster rather than a hen. And almost immediately, my feelings changed. Roosters. Well, everybody knows how they are, right? Aggressive, cocky, strutting around, want to rule the roost. But of course, that wasn't what he was like at all. This was just this bird who waited on the doorstep for me to come outside. But now that I knew he was a rooster, I had to work really hard to feel the same way about him. It was like I was looking at him through stereotype glasses. You see? And I had to work really hard not to have the stereotypes about roosters influence how I saw him, which I did work hard to do because our relationship mattered to me. But it also got me thinking, because Miriam and I were social justice activists, specifically feminists, who had spent our time working within an understanding of how different forms of oppression, like race and gender, interact with one another. And here is this very interesting thing that was happening where gender stereotypes were influencing how I saw an animal, right? So of course I started to think about this, and I asked myself, well, where did I get these ideas, right? I grew up in Baltimore City, not in some rural area. So it's not like, you know, my grandmother sat me down at the kitchen table and said, roosters are one way and hens are another, right? And yet I had very clear ideas in my head about what roosters might be like. So I was like, where did I get these ideas? Cartoons, children's books, movies, And the more that I thought about it, the more that I realized that these media for children featuring animals, and most media for children do feature animals because children really respond to animals, yes? We come into the world ready to recognize kinship and relationship with other animals, and then that gets schooled out of us, right? And so kids really respond to animals, children's media feature animals, and the more that I realized it, children's media specifically feature highly gender stereotyped animals. Highly gendered stereotyped animals. And of course, we consume those media when we're not critical thinkers. And the more I thought about it, the more that I realized that these gender depictions of non-human animals in children's media were a really key component of what feminists call the social construction of gender. Because they make gender seem natural. By gender, I mean the different roles that are assigned to males and females by the dominant culture. And the assignment of these roles is a lie, because we're all perfectly capable of having all of the different characteristics, and different people have different personality profiles. But the gender system says males are this way, females are that way. Yes? And we grow up with it, and it feels natural. And I realized it feels natural in part because we learn it through these gender depictions of animals. Right? Nature and animals, it's very closely related. Anything that's true in the animal kingdom must be natural. Right? And so I realized it's not the only piece of the puzzle, but here was a really important piece of how it is that gender roles come to seem so natural to people. And I learned that through this relationship with this chicken. So this is what I'm here to talk to you about today. Some of the things that I learned about how speciesism interacts with other forms of oppression that I learned specifically through my relationships with non-human animals at what was first called Eastern Shore Chicken Sanctuary and is now called Vine Sanctuary. Now, because we had this early experience with Victor, and because I really don't like to be tricked by stereotypes, we were more open than most sanctuaries at the time to taking in roosters, and particularly to the idea that roosters used in cockfighting could in fact live peaceably with other birds rather than just be immediately euthanized, which at the time was what most people believed would have to happen. And so And so we did develop a program for the rehabilitation of former fighting roosters. It's a program that we still use today, and it's also a program that lots of other sanctuaries, I'm really happy to say, have started to use. I'm not here to talk to you about that program. You could read about it on our website. But rather to say that in working with those roosters, then I also started to think about, well, what is cockfighting? How did that particularly perverse use of animals in entertainment come into being? What is its purpose? What is its function? And the more that you look at cockfighting, the more that you look at the studies that have been done of men, and it's almost always men, who participate in cockfighting, you realize that it's actually not at all an accident that the word cock is a rude word for penis in lots of different languages, not just this. Because the associations of roosters with masculinity are particularly strong and go back thousands of years. And what I came to understand was that cockfighting is a really important piece of this social construction of gender by means of animals, and that we can see when we look at it the ways that this hurts people and animals both, right? Of course we can see when we look at the horrors to which these birds are subjected, these bloody battles, being injected by methamphetamines, being injected by testosterone, having your comb cut off, having knives attached to your legs, and then thrown into a small pit with a similarly armed bird, and you would like to flee, but you can't because they just throw you back in until you fight, right? I mean, but all of that is in the service. All of that is in the service. These are our highly stylized spectacles of masculinity. All of this is in the service of the social construction of what some feminists would call toxic masculinity. All of this is in the service of a kind of masculinity that when it is performed not around the cockfighting ring but out in the rest of the world leads to sexual assault and domestic violence and sport hunting and grilling as a competition sport. So you see what I'm saying here? Right. And so this, in combination with some of my more academic work that had already led me to suspect that I was never going to be able to fully explain sexism without reference to speciesism, gave me a really good example of exactly what that means. Because this word that you've probably heard before, intersectionality, that you probably understand has something to do with different forms of oppression being related to one another, never was meant to be just some sort of vague formulation, vague word that we say to say, oh, well, it's all rooted together. It was meant to be a problem-solving strategy, a conceptual tool that we could use to actually identify intersections, such as cockfighting, and see how they work, see how they hurt different groups, and then go right at those intersections to maybe undermine some systems of oppression. So already, even just within the first few years, we were starting to learn really important things, specifically about the intersection of speciesism and sexism within our sanctuary work. And then what happened was somebody asked us to take in some ducks rescued from a foie gras factory. Miriam and I were nervous, worried, We knew how to take care of chickens. Ducks? We called up Karen, who shouted so joyously about ducks and the delights of ducks and how wonderful ducks could be, that we and so of course then yes, we took in some ducks who had been rescued from a foie gras factory. 8 ducks. And we didn't have room. These are big ducks, and we didn't have room in either of what were then our chicken coops for all 8, right? Because they were big. So we watched them really carefully to try to figure out like who was friends with who, and then assigned 4 to one of the coops and 4 to the other coop. Does it make sense? And these coops were a little bit distant from each other with a fence in between. And sure enough, the ducks proved to be just like the most wonderful additions to the sanctuary. Who here knows ducks? Okay, if you don't already, trust Karen, trust me. Oh my God, ducks. Ducks are the best. They're so social. They burst out of the barn every day. They're so ready for life. They're so interested in each other. In this case, they were so interested in the chickens who we had rescued from the local poultry industry. Sometimes this one group of ducks, they actually adopted this one rooster who we called Chumbawamba. Because, he gets knocked down and gets back up again. He had a broken leg and a broken beak, and he just limped around, and there were the ducks, and he just followed them all around. I mean, the ducks were great. And they were they were even more interested in the young chickens than the adult chickens were. It was, and you'd see talk to each other about the chickens. So, needless to say, the ducks were just wonderful. And so, I was so shocked when I came out one day in the afternoon to refill the water bowls or whatever it was that I was out there to do, and 2 of the ducks were fighting. You can't fight. This is a sanctuary. And I mean, even former fighting roosters don't fight here. You cannot fight. So I figured out who seemed to be the aggressor, right? And I took the one who seemed to be the victim, and I took him out of that yard and coop, and I carried him into the other yard and coop, right? So that he would be safe from the aggressor. Then I went and refilled the water bowls. I must have been putting down fresh, I'm not sure what exactly I was doing, but it was about a half hour, an hour. Turn around, and there's the victim and his aggressor talking to each other through the cage as the victim is trying to get over this one fence to get back. Now, you might think that, but if you had been there, you would have been even more amazed, because actually what he had to do to get to where I saw him was climb this 6-foot fence, walk through the woods, make a sharp left turn, come down the road, make another left turn, up the driveway, and that's where I found him, thwarted by one last fence. So I was like, okay, I made a mistake. Clearly they're friends. Just an argument. So I picked him up, put him back in the yard, went about my business. Came out about an hour later, maybe this time to put out fresh straw. They're fighting again. So again, I separated them, took him into his coop, the other coop. You can guess what's happening. An hour later, yes, he had walked through the yard, gone over the fence, walked through the woods, made a sharp left turn, come down the road, Another sharp left turn, and this time he was like over that last fence. 3 times this happened before I literally hit my head with my hand. It wasn't fighting, it was sex. They were boyfriends. They were boyfriends. We called them Jean-Paul and Jean-Claude. And because they were white, but they had like these little black spots that looked like berets. And they were a pair bond. They were a pair bond for the entirety. They lived with us for 8 years before their livers finally gave out. They slept together every night. They spent every day together. I'm not saying they were monogamous, because they absolutely were not. Ducks tend not to be, except for mallard pair bonds, and even then. So think about it, though. Okay, so think about it, though, right? Because if we didn't mention this, or I'm queer. I actually had read the book, Biological Exuberance, which is a door stopper of a book that details the literally hundreds of non-human animals for whom same-sex pair bonding, child rearing, courtship displays, pair bonding, and yes, sex for pleasure occur. And yet this presumption of duck heterosexuality was so strong in my own mind that I I did split up the boyfriends 3 times. They just were not having it, right? So that really got me thinking about another intersection. That really got me thinking about the role that this idea that homosexuality is unnatural plays in perpetuating homophobia, huh? Yeah. But also about how projecting that onto non-human animals makes it a lot more easy to exploit them, right? If you ever watch natural history shows or whatever, then you know that non-human animals tend to be portrayed as like reproducing automatons. Like all they're interested in doing is getting their genes into the next generation. Every single behavior that you see on some nature show about an animal is explained by their presumed wish to mate heterosexually and get their genes into, yes? Yes, and so it's as though they're reproducing robots. And of course, it doesn't matter if you exploit a robot. But if you start to admit that, oh, wait a minute, they actually pair bond for lots of reasons. They care about each other. They want to be together. They have sex for pleasure. Then you've got to admit the flip side, which is that they feel pain. Which that their desires can be thwarted and they'll feel frustrated when their desires are thwarted. Yes? And so again, here I was looking at this intersection and seeing how, in this case, this idea that homosexuality is unnatural was hurting both non-human animals and human animals, and helping to prop up 2 different systems of oppression. Huh? Does that make sense? And that particular intersection has a lot of structural power. I mean, that particular idea. So I do want to say a little bit more about intersectionality. I think now is a good time to say it. So I don't have time today to talk to you about the history of the idea of intersectionality. You should know that it came out of black feminist thought, that the first person to use the word was a woman named Kimberly Crenshaw. She's a black feminist legal scholar. She was particularly interested in employment discrimination, and she was particularly interested in the problem that women of color and particularly black women were facing in the workplace, where they were experiencing forms of discrimination but couldn't sue. And they couldn't sue because what was happening to them was not happening to white women. And so they couldn't call it sex discrimination. But it wasn't happening to black men, so they couldn't call it race discrimination. And what they were experiencing were forms of oppression that were a result of the interaction between racism and sexism. See? Okay? So that was what led her to first coin that phrase. And since then, lots and lots of scholars and activists have looked at lots and lots of ways that what seem to be different forms of oppression. It's not just that they spring from similar sources, although that's true. And it's not just that they use similar tactics, like stereotyping, because that's, of course, true as well. And it's not just that they benefit the same elite, though, of course, that's true. What's important is how different forms of oppression interact with one another so as to create structures or systems of oppression. This is what's important. This is what's important because this is what allows us to then start to see the structures in which people are making their choices, huh? And it's important for another reason, and it's this, that when you are able to sort of identify intersections that are helping to hold the structure together, then you've got a really apt target for your activism, huh? Because systems, for the most part, are held together by their joints, right? If you want to demolish any sort of structure, I mean, you could just randomly hack away at it. But you'll succeed a lot more quickly if you sort of identify the joints that are holding the structure together, yes? And then it might even be possible you just knock out one little joint and the whole thing falls down, right? Or maybe you significantly disable it, a lot more than just sort of randomly hacking at some particular part. Does that make sense? The other thing is if you can identify a joint or an intersection, then you have most likely identified something that actually several different groups of people or activist organizations are going to be interested in. Perhaps working together to solve, right? And maybe they won't all agree on everything, but maybe they can work together on that. And everybody will be happy if that gets solved, huh? And while they're working together on that, well, they'll be having conversations, and they'll be allies. They'll be having a kind of fellow feeling. And so their conversations with each other about the things they don't yet agree about may be a lot more fruitful than just like random strangers talking to each other about things they disagree about, right? Which goes really well on the internet, by the way. All right, so those are some of, what did I want to, oh God. So those are some of the benefits of intersectional thinking. It allows us to more accurately see the problems that we are trying to solve. And it also offers us some potential foci of our activism that are likely to be particularly effective and are also likely to help us bring people together who might not all otherwise be working with us, huh? So those are some powerful benefits. There are also some challenges, right? My friend who has been with me in many coalitions in the past is shaking her head adamantly. There are a lot of challenges. One big challenge of intersectional thinking is that it sort of challenges us all to understand where we fit in this matrix of privilege and disadvantagement. And almost everybody ends up privileged in at least some ways, and then disadvantaged in various others, and can be really challenging to acknowledge your privilege, particularly if you're disadvantaged in other ways, that's just one of the many challenges that can come up. But, check it. Jean-Paul and Jean-Claude taught me something else that really helps. Because I separated them, but they kept on doing it, right? Right? And you know, right, you know that it used to be, that the homosexuality used to be illegal here, right? Death penalty for it in the colonies. There's still places in the world, right, where homosexual relationships are illegal, can land you in jail, can maybe even land you the death penalty, right? Right. Do people stop? No. There used to be laws against what was called miscegenation here, right? Did that stop people of different races getting together, marrying, having kids? No. Okay, so this tells us something really, really important about desire. And particularly desire for relationships, which is that it is way more powerful than guns, governments, money. So that's something to think about. But I got to move on because I'm supposed to talk to you about mad cows. And who I'm thinking about right now is this cow at the sanctuary called Maddox. And Maddox, somebody's already got the pun, Maddox came to our sanctuary as a 4-day-old calf who had been taken from his mother at a supposedly humane dairy. And he was super lucky in that he was born the afternoon after the veal crate people had come and bought all the calves. And so the farmer was just left with him, and a friendly neighbor was able to just get him, And Maddox is now 2 years old. He's grown up. We don't, of course, we don't dehorn, and so now he has these horns, right? And he really, and yes, we do call him Mad Ox, because he really does. But he really did, even when he was little. The thing is that, oh my gosh, of course he was so totally dear, right? And we loved him to pieces. We still love him to pieces, even though he's like this now. But as wonderful as immediately as he made friends with some sheep, as immediately as he bonded to us, he would always, not always, but very often, he would look at you. He would look at you, and it was just like you could hear him, like look at you, and you could just hear him saying, "Where's my mommy?" And even now, 2 years later, oh my gosh. Okay, so, oh my gosh, okay. So, I know where his mommy is. She's back on that farm. And I'm still determined to get her one way or another. And so whenever people talk about how wonderful Maddox is, yes, oh, I love him so much, but I always feel that, where's my mommy? And when I think about Maddox's mother, I can't understand what's happening to her just by reference to speciesism. I can't understand what's happening to his mother on a Vermont dairy farm without reference to the whole history of the state of Vermont, to colonization. Cows aren't native to the United States. How did cows get to the United States in the first place? How did cows come, how did dairying come to seem in Vermont and in Wisconsin and in parts of California like some natural, traditional heritage that we're supposed to respect, right? And actually in my state of Vermont, if you really look at that history, it's all bound up with whiteness. It's all bound up with making the occupations of white people seem to be the natural occupations of the region. Because the traditional agriculture really was the Abenaki corn bean squash system. That's the real traditional agriculture of Vermont, and the process by which dairying came to seem the tradition that we're all supposed to respect. We can't just explain that by speciesism. We have to look at racism. We have to look at imperialism. We have to look at colonialism. We have to look at how all of that has now been inscribed on the landscape, creating material circumstances that make it very difficult for farmers to do something else. Or even be able to imagine how to do something else. Or even be able to imagine how to do something else. And of course we can't explain it without reference to gender, and how natural it seems to violate female animals in that way. Take their babies away, hook them up to machines twice a day. And so if we want to dismantle the dairy industry, which I intend to do, if we want to dismantle the dairy industry, we won't do it unless we can pay attention to all of those things, unless we are mindful of those situations, unless we start to think about problems as situations, as locations within intersecting systems, including material systems, ecological systems, economic systems, social systems, and learn to think ecologically in the same way that wildlife biologists have to think ecologically. We, as activists, have to think ecologically. Luckily, sheep. I have to try to be sheep. Okay, but the sheep can help us do that, right? Right, yes, the sheep will help us do that. Because one thing I always say at the sanctuary is, because look, I told you, I grew up in Baltimore City, right? I mean, now I live with like cows and sheep. And the sheep have been like the most amazing to me. And one thing I'm always heard saying is whoever coined the phrase sheepish never met a sheep. Or they say that phrase like sheep. Sheep at our place are so relentless and creative in their intention to eat emu food and chicken food that we must constantly build new structures that they then figure out how to get into, which we then have to change. Relentless, creative, all in the service of desire. So again, I'll come back to this. We are here we are, here you are as a result of everything in your life, right? Brought you to this point. Yes? This is also true of the butcher. This is also true of the dairy farmer. This is also true of the young man that Siba and I saw eating a beef burger while parking his car outside while everybody was eating lunch. We have to learn to think ecologically about the problems that we're trying to solve, seeing them as situations. Even though it's really tempting to just sort of focus in on one thing and say, we just do this, and we just keep doing this. We keep making that argument, right? And then we forget, oh, but wait, there's this, and there's this, and there's this. So, and nobody needs to think of it, none of us can do it all by ourselves, right? This is why we have to get better at making coalitions, huh? And why we need to broaden our movement in so many different ways, right? Because there's so much that needs to happen. However, it is tricky, it is difficult, but we will remember Jean-Paul and Jean-Claude, who were together their whole life until finally one of them perished of liver disease. The other, who seemed to be perfectly fine, died within a week. We remember their spirit, and that reminds us of the power of desire. Then that does two things for us. One, it reminds us that, you know what, that guy parking the car, driving the beef burger, he probably has some far more profound desires than the desire for a beef burger. He has desires that no beef burger could ever solve, that none of the plastic pleasures of consumer capitalism could provide for him, right? Everybody's hungry for connection. If we can find ways to tap into that, to have that not only motivate our own activism, right? We have to tap into it for ourselves, but we have to design our campaigns and design our rhetoric and design everything we do with an awareness of that deep desire for better relationships that everybody has. Then we will have tapped into the most powerful source of energy at all, and it's renewable. So we totally can do that, I think. And you're telling me 2 minutes, but I'm done.